more of these songs finally. I felt like I took like 2 years to write the album, and I went into like a super hole. Like I was like super reclusive, and then all of a sudden I'm back. It's crazy.
How's it going, everyone? The 1MFP here. I hope you're all having a great day today. I recently had the privilege of seeing Banks live on the 3 tour, so I thought I'd go ahead and give you guys my opinion on the show, let you guys know what I thought, and just talk about my experience overall. So first things first, I do want to bring up that this was actually my second Banks concert. The first time I saw her was back in 2017 on the Alter tour. And, going into that concert, going into my first Banks concert, there was definitely a lot of curiosity. I didn't know exactly what to expect from a Banks performance because, going back to something I mentioned in my Gimme reaction, which I'll have linked down below and I'll have pop up right here in the eye if you haven't seen it already. In that reaction, I brought up the first time I heard Banks. The first time I heard a Banks song was back in 2014, 2015. I heard Begging for Thread on the radio in my car. I remember the moment very vividly. And, essentially my attention was really drawn to that song because of, how good it sounded, from production to vocal delivery to the actual songwriting itself, the lyrics, I mean. The lyrics are very beautifully written, they're poetic, and they hit hard because of how well they're delivered. And I chalk that up to the energy behind the song because, if I listen to Banks' music, one of the common trends seem to be that the energy or the emotion behind the song seems to be the building block. Another aspect about that song that convinced me that I had to go listen to more Banks and, eventually led me to listening to Goddess in its entirety was the chorus. You have this really strong, deep vocal as the lead, which is backed by a higher pitched, slightly differently delivered version of the lyrics that the deeper vocals are delivering. And it makes for this beautiful harmony that it just felt very distinct and unique. So on the power of that, I went out and listened to Goddess, and I was impressed by that album. Then The Alter came out, and I remember a distinct moment back then as well. I was on my walk to work one day, and I listened to the first 5 songs off of that album. And during my lunch break that day, I went out and bought a physical copy of the album. I was sold on those 5 songs alone. So, with The Alter, she really solidified her place as one of my favorite artists. And a lot of it just has to do with that energy I just spoke of. That's something I mentioned in the Gimme reaction. That's something I'm going to mention here today. And it relates heavily to what I appreciate about her live performances. Because, the common trend between what I saw from Goddess and The Alter is a lot of her songwriting is based on her own experiences, her life experiences, and she gets really detailed and personal about those experiences. And sometimes one of the main difficulties with that type of subject matter is actually having it resonate with people because, the further you zoom into a topic and your experiences, the harder it is for people to relate because not everyone can really say that they've experienced something similar. Sometimes it's just going to be completely different from anything you've experienced. So what Banks does really well to bridge that gap, in my opinion, is the expressionism in her music. It's very emotion-packed. That's where her music really hooks me sometimes because, where I can't relate to the exact situation, I can relate to the emotion because we've all experienced happiness, sadness, guilt, grief, relief. We've all experienced these emotions one way or another through one situation or another. So, feeling that emotion allows us to empathize with Banks as she's singing what she's singing. And it gives us better perspective on how to view the situation. It allows us to get closer to the situation she's talking about. She does an exceptionally great job of making that possible through various means. whether it's the actual writing through her use of expressions and wording, or her style of wording, I should say. It's a very poetic approach to writing. And then on top of that, you have the delivery from a sonic standpoint. She adds interesting textures to her voice through vibrato, through her vocal fry, through her use of tones. It just adds a very interesting dynamic to the already interesting wording of the verses and the choruses. So, you add those two things together and you already have some interesting, compelling storytelling that is quite accessible if you're paying attention to the emotion. So that's one of the main things I really appreciate about her music. It's how expressive she is with it, how much emotion is packed in it, how pure and honest it feels. My first time going to a Banks concert, I was interested in seeing how that aspect of her music would translate to a live stage. And I was also very interested in seeing how well she would be able to deliver the songs, because, you listen to her singing on these studio tracks and, she sounds phenomenal. So how well would she be able to perform those songs live in terms of actual singing abilities? And, I was blown away by that concert. She definitely delivers with her voice. She sounds amazing live. And on top of that, you definitely feel the emotion behind the vocals. But on top of that, you have this additional level of storytelling through the choreography. She's got dances going on for, the majority of her songs. So it's really a whole experience in of itself. So now, finally, to get into my experience of seeing her live on the 3 tour after having seen her 2 years prior on the Alter tour. That show prepared me for this show in terms of what to expect. I knew I could expect her to definitely deliver on the vocal front. I knew I could expect some very interesting choreography to accompany these songs that are already really well written and deliver an additional level of narrative. So sure enough, that's exactly what I got out of this show. And, I was really interested going into this to see how some of these songs would be performed live, because having that experience with the first concert, you could only be excited to see how some of your favorite songs off of 3 would be performed live. And Propaganda is one of them. That's one of my favorites off of 3. The Fall is another one. Contaminated as well. Those are songs I definitely went into this concert hoping to see live, and I was not disappointed. She performed those really well. In fact, whatever set of songs it is you love off of 3, there's a high chance that she'll be performing them live. At this concert specifically, she performed 11 out of the 13 songs. So, definitely very pleasing in that regard. The 2 that were missing off the top of my head were If We Were Made of Water and What About Love. So, I was really looking forward to If We Were Made of Water, honestly. So I was a little bit bummed that I didn't hear that, but, she offers such a strong set list anyway, and she performs so well that it didn't matter that much. And I'm sure she'll be, taking some songs out and replacing them. So I'm sure at some point you'll hear some live versions of the songs I mentioned that weren't included in the set list this time around. But yeah, you got 11 songs off of 3, then you got 3 songs off of The Altar and 3 songs off of Goddess, and on top of that you had Better and Underdog. So basically a really strong set list overall. It starts off with an interesting intro in Till Now, which you could only imagine how strong that would be as an intro, right? I remember the first time I listened to 3 and I heard Till Now, I was instantly drawn into that album. So Till Now works very well as an intro, and then we're led into Underdog, which, again, another song that sounds so good live, honestly. I talked about a little bit earlier, I talked about how she uses different vocal techniques, sometimes just sound effects to really draw out the emotion behind a song, because in Underdog specifically, you have the chorus where she repeats the lines, "You can make it as an underdog," and in between the repetitions, she has a little grunt in between that really adds a layer of emotion and feel to the song. It adds this grit to it that functions so well within the context that is provided with the verses themselves. And that translates so well to the live performance. Similarly to what I was talking about earlier, the emotion behind a song does translate to her live performances in general. She does a really good job of taking that feeling you get from the song, and bringing it to the live stage. So that is something that is truly to be appreciated about Banks live. Some other songs that stood out for me off of this set list include Stroke. That song hits so hard live. You know, you talk about a song that you could hear the studio version of and appreciate, but then you come to a live show and it just adds a whole nother level of appreciation to it. Stroke is one of those songs. It hits so hard live. Drowning is one of my personal favorites off of Goddess, and the crowd really got into that performance. They sang along for a large majority of the song, so it made for quite the ambiance for that performance. Contaminated definitely has to be on that list, because if we're going to talk about her vocal abilities live, in that song you definitely have it on display, and that performance gave me chills. So Contaminated, definitely one of my favorites. Alaska was cool, a little bit more fun and laid back, and that led into Propaganda, and Propaganda, like I said, is one of my favorites off of 3.
Sounds called Propaganda.
That song didn't disappoint at all. Again, the crowd seemed to be really into that song as well, so it made for quite the ambiance. And, you know, Banks really feeds off of that too. You know, when she sees that the crowd is into it, it makes for this deeper connection between her and the fans, and like she just gets really involved with that. Another standout would have to be Poltergeist for me, which is one of my favorites off of The Altar. And that's another song that the fans really got into. Godless was another one that was really strong. Then you had The Fall, which, I mean, again, the ambiance during The Fall was pretty intense. That chorus especially, that third verse. Gimme, and then we had the Encore, and you know, the Encore was also really cool because, you know, it took a good 3 minutes of screaming before she came out, and did she ever deliver there as well? And it ended on Beggin' for Thread, which was cool for me given that that's the song I discovered her through.
I hear you scream this part.
was a great experience, a great show, strong set, amazing performance. You know, if we're going to talk about the presentation itself, the light show was on a whole other level. You know, it was good on the Alter tour. I would say it's even better here on the 3 tour. The choreography is really strong. The atmosphere in the crowd was incredible, you know, just the contagious atmosphere with how involved the crowd was. Everybody just seemed to love this new material. Now, before I sign off here, there are some observations I'd like to bring up that I personally feel added to my appreciation of Banks as a performer. You know, first thing, just a night before the show I saw, Banks brought up that she previously got injured. She fractured her spine. I think she mentioned it was 6 weeks prior to that show. The first thing I'd like to bring up here is how well she performed under those circumstances. Speaking from personal experiences, I've dealt with fractures twice, once with my wrist and once with my arm. And with my wrist, it took 2 weeks for it to heal. For my arm, it took 2 months, and that's for the bone to heal, right? Beyond that, it takes time to rehabilitate the part because it's not going to be moving the way you want it to. You're not going to be able to move it the way you want it to. Movements do not feel natural after that. So it takes time to rehabilitate it and to make things feel somewhat normal, if you will. So I can't speak on Banks's injury per se. I don't know what the severity of the issue was or the injury was. I don't know exactly where she was in terms of the healing process or the rehabilitation process. But I could say that, you know, if it was 6 weeks prior to her performance, she was probably still dealing with, you know, issues relating to the injury at that point in time. So I would say it was really important for her to find ways to work around the injury, you know, because you can't work against your body in that sense. You can't push your body or else you risk aggravating the injury, and that's just no good for anyone. So I was really impressed with her approach. I was impressed with the quality of performance she was able to deliver despite the circumstances. You know, it takes a lot of work and rehearsing to find ways to make this performance work despite those limitations. So, you know, definitely a lot of props to her in that respect. So in summary, my first point is she was working well within her limitations. I find that she delivered a very solid performance despite that circumstance. And that leads me into my second point, which has to do with some technical difficulties she was experiencing. From, you know, very early on in the show, she seemed to be dealing with issues with her in-ear monitor. I don't know specifically what the issue was, but I saw her numerous times signal her sound tech guy to, you know, up the volume in the monitor. At least that's what it seemed like. At some point, I think it was during stroke, she straight up like danced or moved towards the sound tech guy on the side to have him fix the monitor mid-performance. So, you know, she was doing these things on the fly and it didn't really seem to affect her performance at all. You know, her vocals were still very, very strong. I didn't really see any fluctuation in quality despite those things. Case in point, during that third verse of The Fall, she has some auto-tune going on, and for like half a second or so, her mic cut off completely, and she just jumped right back into it, like she never stopped or anything. It didn't seem to negatively affect her performance. She just kept it fluid. So, you know, it was just really impressive to see her be able to pull that off. You have these situations going on that could possibly negatively affect a performance, and she's just working through them so graciously, you know. She was dealing with it on the fly, and she delivered a strong performance regardless. Honestly, it was hardly noticeable. Like, the only reason I noticed it is because I was close up, so, you know, I could see where the sound tech guy was. I could see her when she was looking at the sound tech guy. It was really interesting to see. She would like incorporate signals to the sound tech guy while she was performing within the movements of the choreography. Sometimes it looked like it was just part of the choreography. Very impressive to see her deal with things on the fly like that. So, you know, in terms of how I appreciated her performance on a whole other level, you know, it has to do with how well she was dealing with these circumstances, you know, these things that could possibly have a negative influence on the performance. She still delivered an exceptionally strong performance despite those circumstances. That really speaks to her abilities as a performer and to her level of professionalism. You know, she really dealt with that like a pro. So I couldn't help but be impressed. And, you know, yeah, that pretty much sums up what I thought of this concert. Very, very strong performance in terms of vocal abilities, in terms of the show she puts on with the dance and the lights. There's definitely a lot of emotional involvement in the performance itself. There's a lot of connection with the crowd, and she feeds off of that energy, and she allows that energy to shine as well. Whatever doesn't go according to plan, she seems to deal with rather effortlessly. And it just makes for an amazing show. I had a great time. I was very happy to be part of that crowd. And yeah, I look forward to seeing her again live in the future. And that was my experience at the 3 tour. Let me know what you guys thought of this video in the comments down below. I love hearing what you guys have to say. Are you guys going to be seeing Banks live? Have you already seen her live? Whether it's the 3 tour, whether it was the Alter tour, or before that. Let me know what your experiences were like at her shows. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. I always appreciate the support. And please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already and would like to see more of my reaction videos. And I will see you all next time. Have a great day, y'all.